Across the world, some structures were built in places where gravity, unstable ground, deep canyons, violent seas, and extreme altitude seem to leave almost no room for error. Some have leaned for centuries. Others hang above empty space, while a few are so massive that even their effect on the planet can be calculated. What makes these structures unforgettable is not simply the danger they appear to represent, but the engineering decisions that allowed them to survive in places where construction seems almost unreasonable. Today, we explore 10 most dangerous structures in the world, where architecture and nature meet at the very edge of what seems possible. Leaning Tower of Pisa, Italy. For more than 850 years, the Leaning Tower of Pisa has stood on weak, highly compressible soil, creating one of architecture's strangest contradictions. The same ground supporting the monument is also responsible for its famous tilt. As the medieval tower rose higher, uneven settlement beneath its relatively shallow foundation gradually pushed the structure sideways. And by the late 20th century, its increasing inclination had become a serious engineering concern. Rather than forcing the tower completely upright, engineers removed carefully controlled amounts of soil from beneath its higher northern side, allowing the monument to rotate slightly back towards stability without destroying the lean that made it famous. The intervention reduced the inclination by roughly 10%, and continuous monitoring after the tower reopened in 2001 showed that its movement had slowed dramatically. Today, the real wonder is not that Pisa leans, but that engineers learned how to preserve an 8th-century-old structural mistake without erasing the very feature the world recognizes. Would you feel comfortable climbing a tower when your eyes can clearly see that the entire building is leaning? Three Gorges Dam, China. Across the Yangtze River, the Three Gorges Reservoir holds such an extraordinary mass of water that scientists can calculate its theoretical influence not only on the landscape, but even on the rotation of Earth itself. When the reservoir is full, roughly 40 cubic kilometers of water are redistributed and held at elevation, slightly changing the planet's moment of inertia. In the same basic way, a spinning skater slows when extending their arms. Geophysical calculations estimated that this redistribution could increase the length of a day by approximately 0.006 microseconds, an effect far too small for humans to notice, but remarkable for something created by engineering. This does not mean the dam is dangerously changing the planet, or that Earth's rotation can suddenly be felt. because movements of mass from earthquakes, oceans, weather, reservoirs, and many other processes continually produce tiny rotational effects. The extraordinary part is simply scale. A structure built across one river can store enough water that its influence appears in equations describing the motion of an entire planet. Before we continue, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Tell me in the comments below. Cabane de Bertol, Swiss Alps. Aescher, 863 feet above sea level. Cabane de Bertol sits on a narrow rocky spur, so exposed that the four-level mountain refuge looks less like a building and more like something balanced on the edge of the Alps. Even during summer, reaching the hut can require crossing glacial terrain before the final approach climbs exposed rock using fixed metal ladders and artificial steps. The Swiss Alpine Club describes the normal route as a genuine high alpine challenge because the difficulty does not disappear simply because a warm shelter is visible above you. Once inside, however, climbers find sleeping spaces and shelter surrounded by views towards some of the Alps' most dramatic peaks, creating an extreme contrast between the comfort of the hut and the environment immediately outside. Its most remarkable feature is therefore not its height alone, but the fact that reaching the front door feels like the final section of a mountaineering route rather than arriving at an ordinary building. Could you relax inside, knowing that leaving the hut means climbing back down those ladders? Tourlitis Lighthouse, Andros, Greece. Off the coast of Andros, Tourlitis Lighthouse rises from a narrow sea rock surrounded by the Aegean, making the structure appear as though the ocean itself has somehow grown a tiny stone tower. The lighthouse was originally constructed in 1887 and entered service in 1897, with its light positioned about 36 meters above the sea, despite the building itself occupying almost no conventional land. Waves completely surround the rock, while a staircase carved into the stone twists upward toward the lighthouse, creating one of the most visually exposed navigation structures in Greece. The original structure was destroyed during World War II, but it was eventually reconstructed in its historic form in 1994, returning the lighthouse to the isolated rock where it had once guided ships. What makes Tourlitis look dangerous is the complete absence of anything resembling a normal foundation site. No beach, no harbor platform, only one thin piece of rock between the building and the open sea. Would you spend a stormy night inside a lighthouse, surrounded by waves on every side? Bivacco Buffa di Perrero, Italy. high on Monte Cristallo in the Dolomites. Bivacco Buffa di Perrero appears embedded directly into a narrow mountain ledge, with a simple stone wall separating its tiny interior from an enormous drop outside. The shelter originated from military infrastructure created in these mountains during the First World War, when soldiers needed protected positions in terrain that remains difficult for experienced climbers today. Instead of standing freely like a normal cabin, the structure uses the mountain itself as part of its walls and protection, making it seem less constructed on the cliff than inserted directly into it. Its location remains so difficult that modern restoration work has required specialized mountaineering access and helicopter support rather than ordinary construction vehicles. That is what makes this tiny building more impressive than many skyscrapers. Almost every stone had to reach a location where simply standing safely already requires significant effort. If this were your shelter for the night, would the mountain view calm you or keep you awake? Đurđevića Tara Bridge, Montenegro. Across northern Montenegro, the Đurđevića Tara Bridge carries a road approximately 172 meters, or 564 feet, above the Tara River, making vehicles crossing its concrete arches appear tiny against the canyon below. Completed around 1940, the bridge stretches roughly 365 meters across the gorge using 5 arches, with the largest spanning more than 100 meters between its supports. The engineering challenge was not simply reaching the opposite side, but constructing a large, reinforced concrete structure across terrain where the river lies hundreds of feet beneath the roadway, and steep canyon walls restrict access from both directions. From the bridge deck, the structure can feel surprisingly ordinary until you look sideways and realize the forest drops almost vertically toward the narrow ribbon of water far below. Its elegant arches disguise the amount of empty space they cross, which is precisely why the bridge can look impossibly fragile from a distant viewpoint, even though it was built to carry road traffic. Would you look over the railing here, or keep your eyes straight ahead until you reach the other side? Aescher Mountain Inn, Switzerland. At Aescher in Switzerland's Alpsteinregion, an old mountain guesthouse occupies such a narrow ledge beneath an overhanging rock wall that part of the building seems compressed directly between the mountain and empty space. The inn stands around 454 meters above sea level, and the cliff behind it does more than provide scenery. The massive limestone overhang visually becomes part of the architecture itself. Visitors can approach from the Ebenalp cable car station and walk through the wild Kirchley caves, meaning the final arrival reveals the guest house only after passing directly through the mountain landscape surrounding it. From certain angles, there appears to be barely enough level ground for the building, terrace, and path before the terrain falls away toward the valley. That setting turns something as familiar as sitting down for a meal into an unusual experience, because one side of the table faces solid mountain while the other looks outward across the Alps. You are watching from where today? And what time is it there right now? Leave your city and local time below. Meteora Monasteries, Greece. Across central Greece, monasteries stand on enormous sandstone pillars rising hundreds of meters above the surrounding plain, making Meteora look like a religious settlement built on the tops of natural skyscrapers. Monks began settling among these almost inaccessible formations from around the 11th century, and eventually 24 monasteries were constructed despite the extraordinary difficulty of moving people and materials onto the summits. Before modern stairways and improved access, some monasteries relied on ladders, ropes, and nets that could lift people vertically beside cliffs hundreds of meters high. UNESCO notes that the sandstone peaks themselves can rise more than 400 meters above the surrounding landscape, explaining why even substantial monastery buildings appear small when viewed from the valley. The danger-looking position was intentional rather than accidental, because physical isolation provided monks with both protection and separation from ordinary life below. If you had lived here centuries ago, would the isolation feel peaceful or terrifying? Kakum Canopy, Walkway, Ghana. Inside Ghana's Kakum rainforest, a chain of suspension bridges carries visitors through the upper forest canopy, where narrow wooden walkways move between enormous trees high above the ground. The system connects 7 platforms across roughly 330 to 350 meters of walkway, with some sections rising between about 27 and 40 meters above the forest floor. Instead of viewing tropical forest from below, the bridges place people directly among upper branches, normally occupied by birds, insects, and plants that can be difficult to observe from ground level. Wooden planks, wire ropes, safety netting, and carefully selected anchor trees create a structure that visually feels far lighter than the height beneath it would suggest. Its apparent danger is part of the experience, but the walkway was specifically developed for controlled ecotourism and has been maintained as a visitor attraction rather than an improvised rope bridge through the forest. Would you cross slowly while looking down, or keep your eyes on the trees ahead? El Caminito del Rey, Spain. Along the walls of the Gaetanes Gorge in southern Spain, El Caminito del Rey follows a cliff roughly 100 meters above the ground. with sections of walkway appearing to hang directly from vertical limestone. The old path became famous for its deteriorated concrete and extreme exposure, but the route people visit today is a rehabilitated structure with protective mesh, strong cables, railings, and modern walkways designed specifically for public use. That safety upgrade creates a strange visual contrast because visitors can sometimes see remnants of the original broken pathway directly beneath the newer wooden structure. The gorge remains narrow and dramatically deep, so even when the walkway beneath your feet is secure, the empty space on the other side of the railing can make every step feel much more exposed than it really is. Caminito del Rey therefore closes this journey with an important distinction. A structure can look terrifying without being recklessly dangerous, because modern engineering can preserve the sensation of exposure while dramatically reducing the original risk. Of all 10 structures in this video, which one would be hardest for you to visit?